Hey guys, and welcome back to the FFP. It's time for Week 9 Waiver Wire. Going to get into some options for you guys to consider as, we talk about bolstering your lineup to help you make that push for the championships. Now, continue to make some moves. If your team is on the border, look at making a trade. You can still be competitive at this point, even if you are 500. I have seen teams finish with one win over 500, somehow make the playoffs in fantasy, and even take home a championship. So you never know what can happen. Just keep making moves. Now, anybody who watches this channel, if you've watched this for a while, you know by that I don't mean panic. Okay, just because a player has played bad doesn't mean he will always continue to play bad, doesn't mean to sell your whole roster. It just means to not give up and continually make moves. That being said, there's not a ton of options out here this week. There are some pretty good ones, some guys I'm excited about, but as we continue further into the NFL season, there will always be less and less options. So, we've said this every week. I'll say it again. I won't say it any more times after this one time in this video, but make these moves as soon as you can. Pick these guys up now. Don't wait, because every single week the talent gets picked from the waiver wire even more. And make sure to keep making waiver wire moves, even if you're in a dynasty league and you're out of it, because there is a lot of talent that you can pick up now that will likely become an absolute stud for you next year. All right, so getting into the video, let's start off with, as we always start off with, our top 5 pickups. I like to start off with these guys just to give you your top available options. First one's got to be Michael Carter. Now, he's just 33% available, but he's at the running back position, which comes at a premium in fantasy. Hopefully, you've been listening to me for the last couple of weeks. I know Rob's not as big on Carter as I have been, but I've been a big fan of him for a while now, and there's a lot of fantasy value there. Now, again, 33% available, not super highly available, but he is a rookie running back who has shown talent and is the clear-cut #1 running back in that backfield. There's no arguing it. Now, there's been some issues there. He hasn't been the most efficient, and that offense as a whole has been a mess. But over the last 2 games, and especially this last game in Week 8, both of those questions have really been fixed. We're going to talk about the quarterback Mike White in his first start and what that looks like later on when we get to the quarterback. So I'm going to push that off for now. But the quarterback play's been better, and that's helped. We'll just say that. Now, he's got 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games, and here's what really keeps him just super valuable. His last game alone, he had 15 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown. That's 5.1 yards per carry. So we got the efficiency there. We were getting the volume. He even found the end zone. It was a great game. But what made him stand out was 14 targets, 9 catches, and 95 yards in the passing game. That's what Michael Carter does for you. He is a PPR stud if he's got a quarterback who will throw his way. And Mike White, when he's under center, certainly does. But that's not just a fluke. The game before, when Mike White was the quarterback for the majority of the game, he saw 9 targets, 8 catches, and 67 yards. So he's done it back-to-back games. We have to begin to imagine that he is starting to be a legitimate running back. Again, I've been saying it for weeks. I know that he's not on the best team. You can look back at all our waiver wire videos for the last couple of months, and what have I been saying many times over? Once this offense gets better, sure enough, he'll have some value, and certainly I've been right at this point. They go out there and beat the Bengals, who I believe were 6-1 going into that matchup. What a surprising game that was. It was honestly a lot of fun to watch. I was definitely rooting for the Jets for some reason, not against the Bengals. It's just really nice to see the underdog come home with a win, especially with a rookie quarterback like Mike White, who we will talk about later. But that's got to be your #1 option there. Michael Carter, he's starting to look more and more impressive every single week that he plays. At #2, we're going to go with another running back, J.D. McKissic. Now, he's not a guy who's super exciting. I don't think he has quite the upside as some of the other players we may talk about in this video, but he is a PPR stud. He offers a ton of value, and he's actually 43% available, which means basically half of you guys are going to be able to pick him up in your league. And here's what really stands out to us. He's not super great on the ground game, but none of those running backs have been super efficient. Part of that comes down to offensive coaching scheme, the offensive line, not just needing some better blockers, and a lot of those little things. So that's not a big deal for me. Where he stands out is the 8 catches for 83 yards that he had last game. That's what really stands out. In fact, over the last 3 games, McKissic is currently 14th in fantasy running back scoring in PPR leagues. You might not love him, but that's okay. At least own him. We can talk about the start sit later. We can talk about that, but he is super valuable. And the big thing being, Antonio Gibson has just been a bust this year. Now, he has not performed up to hype, but here's what me and Rob were just talking about today. You need to know. Antonio Gibson was great the first week, and he has continually gotten worse every single week, and that's because he's playing through a fractured shin, I believe it is. I don't remember exactly what the technical medical term was, but he's got, I think, a pretty brutal injury in his leg, and we keep hearing coaches and professionals say things like, oh, but it won't affect his play. I'm here to tell you right now, any injury will affect your play, and it's been very clear because Gibson is a great running back who's playing like a garbage one. Going into next season, Gibson will be the running back. But for right now, he is not capable of fulfilling that role. He needs to take some time away from football and rest up, watch some film, get some strength back, and be healthy for next year. As of right now, J.D. McKissic, 43% available, is a great pickup for those of you who are Antonio Gibson owners who drafted him to be an RB1 or an RB2 and are being disappointed. McKissic is your guy. At number 3 for our must pick up guys, I'm actually going to go with kickers and defenses. We're going to get to them later when we go by position. There is so much talent out there. People are continually neglecting their kickers and their defenses, and I don't understand it. You're sitting here scratching your head making waiver moves for just not great valuable running backs or wide receivers who are inconsistent or tight ends who are only getting 2 targets a game. Meanwhile, you're ignoring a kicker who could get you 15 points in a game and help you win a matchup. Don't be stupid. Make moves on kickers and defenses. I'm not going to break it down a ton right now because we're going to get into those later when we go by position. But it's just baffling that I see people who will make like 80 waiver wire claims in a season and only make 2 for a kicker or a defense. And they wonder why they're struggling. It matters. Play matchup. Get talent. Think forward. Again, we'll get into it later, but I wanted to put that. This is kind of my own personal one. Number 3, don't be stupid. Don't ignore positions because they're not exciting. People sometimes do it with tight end as well. It's just dumb. At number 4, Devontae Parker is a must-pick-up wide receiver who is being extremely undervalued. He is 66% available, and I'll just say it, I don't get it. In his first game back from injury, he has to play the Buffalo Bills, who are like the stingiest pass defense in the NFL. They are an elite pass defense. They are phenomenal. They are great. And he's in his first game back, and he gets 11 targets, 8 catches for 85 yards. And that's not a fluke. His last healthy game before he got hurt, 77 yards and a touchdown. Devontae Parker is a good fantasy wide receiver. He has a role in that offense. Now, I get that there's some other weapons there. Mike Gesicki's looked good this year. And of course, Jalen Waddle is still the wide receiver 1. But there's room for 2 producers there. Gesicki, is not a reliable tight end. Major inconsistencies there. And with how bad their running game and defense is, there is more than enough room for 2 valuable wide receivers. So yeah, pick up Devontae Parker if you're looking for a wide receiver. I think he's your best option at this point. Finally, guys, our number 5 thing to consider for the pickups. Rob requested that I put this in the video, and it is that the trade deadline is Tuesday. So you need to keep your phone by you with your notification with that ringer on so you can be ready. Moves are going to happen. There are guys who are fairly likely to get traded, right? There are talented players who could get shipped. Say, for example, if the Vikings come away with a loss this week and they just don't feel like they're a playoff team and they're struggling, an older but talented guy like Thielen could get traded away as they've already got 2 receivers there that they like and plenty of weapons. That's just one example, and that's not going to happen, trust me. But yeah, that's something to consider. So pay attention to that. Keep your mind open. It depends on what's going to happen. Currently, I'm recording this late Sunday night, so I wanted to clarify that. That's why, we don't know exactly what's going to happen over the next couple days with those trades, but be ready. Anything could happen. Of course, we're still waiting on, as there always is, the trade talk with Deshaun Watson, but he's not the only guy. Any player from any team can get shipped at any point in the season, so be ready for that because that can seriously shift fantasy values. And you know what? There's pretty much 1 or 2 trades every year. So don't act like it's not going to happen. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of who. All right, so that was our top 5 guys or things to consider this week in waiver wire. Let's get by position now into the quarterbacks. First guy we got to talk about, and I've been excited about this, so let's get into it, Mike White. First of all, I think he set the record, or was, I think, second on the list for most passing yards in an NFL debut by a quarterback. He threw like 405 yards and 3 touchdowns in his first NFL start. That's insane. In fact, he did it against a Bengals defense that heading into that game allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. The fact of the matter is he was wildly productive, and he actually looked okay the week prior versus the Patriots. 200 yards in less than a full start, less than a full game against a tough defense. Mike White, in a lot of ways, seems to be a very legitimate quarterback. Now, I don't necessarily trust him. I'm not going to plug him into my lineup, but he seemed to make that entire offense better. He makes the most of his running back there, as we already talked about it with Michael Carter. I mean, he threw 95 yards to his running back. He also, uses those weapons there, especially that late touchdown to Croft. Croft is not a great tight end, but he made Croft look like phenomenal in that game, catching that nice touchdown at the end to get the win in a tough game. Now, there's some things to consider. One, here's a guy who he's not a rookie. He was drafted in 2018 by the Cowboys and has been in the NFL. He's been a journeyman. So that's something to consider, right? If he were a first-round pick in his first start, my first thought is clearly they saw something. Now, maybe there's a chance that teams missed something when they drafted him and he's been sitting on the bench, but you'd think that maybe they'd see something in practices as well. I'm not ready to call him the real deal, but clearly he has huge upside, and I'm excited to see what he can do in the future. He's 99% available. I'm probably not going to pick him up because I don't trust him that much, and the position is so full of talent. In fact, for me, he's still probably not even my number 1 pickup. So let's talk about my number 1 pickup. I think it's still got to be Derek Carr. Somehow he is 40% available, and I just don't get it. He has at least 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in 5 of his 7 games. He is playing phenomenal. Barring a tough game against a really good defense, he is a startable quarterback. And the thing you need to know is it doesn't matter what quarterback we're talking about. Any quarterback can and probably will have a bad day in a matchup against a good defense. So Carr is really just as valuable as any other top 12 fantasy quarterback this year. He's got good weapons. He got Waller back. He's got, of course, a couple running backs there who are all not great, but fairly good. And then he's got like 3 or 4 receivers who are more than doable. I'm a huge fan. I think Hunter Renfrow is very underrated. Not the biggest on him, but Derek Carr, definitely love that guy. For me, I think he's probably my number 1 pickup, and based off matchup, he is more than startable. The list doesn't end there, though. Carson Wentz is 44% available, and he could also be the next guy on the list. He made a terrible throw, a horrible pick 6, but it was in a really bad situation, and ultimately he still had good fantasy numbers because we're not here to talk about how good of a quarterback he is. I want to talk about production from a fantasy point. He's got back-to-back weeks with 3 touchdowns. He's got 5 straight games with at least 2 touchdowns. He's been very productive. He's making Michael Pittman look like a solid perennial wide receiver 1 who could be a Pro Bowl receiver. He looks really good. They've fixed that running game, and that has helped him a ton. Jonathan Taylor there has been a huge part of that passing game working because they're keeping defenses honest. And it's, again, Wentz finally turned things around, but it's because he finally got healthy and they finally got their offensive line healthy. I'm excited to see what happens next year. I hope in the offseason they add a talented receiver to that group. Carson Wentz is another guy to consider. Like all quarterbacks, especially off the waiver wire, they are matchup dependent, but that's okay. Pretty much all quarterbacks are matchup dependent, and there's a reason you're picking them up off the waiver wire, so no concern there. Tua is also 64% available, and you got to consider Tua. Now, last week he struggled, but he struggled against the Bills defense that is giving up the fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. He also had the least passing attempts that he's had in his 3 games back. So tough matchup, low volume, not a lot to love there. Now he's going to go up against Houston this coming week, who have allowed back-to-back 3-touchdown games versus them. In fact, quarterbacks versus the Texans are almost averaging 3 touchdowns a game. So huge upside there. In fact, go back to week 7 last week. He was #1 in quarterback scoring. He threw 4 touchdowns. I think Tua has the most long-term upside of all the QBs that we've talked about. He's very talented. He got Parker back, and that's clearly been a part of his success. So there's another option. There's some more quarterbacks that you can consider there, right? There's tons of young guys like Trevor Lawrence or guys who are at least starting quarterbacks. Can't wait to see what Bridgewater can do when Jerry Jeudy comes back. But ultimately, there's a couple of names for you. I don't love any of them, and none of them are matchup proof, but they all have value. All right, moving on to the running backs now. There's options here, and it's much like the quarterbacks, and maybe we should make a banner and have it as the theme for the week. I guess the theme is good, not great. There's value here, but there's nothing super exciting, nothing to be pumped about other than Michael Carter. Kind of like that guy right now, excited to see what he can do. I'd love to see Mike White turn out and Carter turn out, and suddenly they're this great offense. That'd be really fun. But probably not going to happen. But moving on to some other running backs, Kenyon Drake is 37% available. And his last couple of games have looked great. 73 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then he had 79 yards and a touchdown. His last 2 games, he finds the end zone. And here's the thing, you can trust that if he's the only running back in that backfield because they're going to throw the ball, they're going to get into the red zone, and that's where touchdowns are produced. And then, of course, running backs have a much higher usage in the red zone. So, like him a lot. The thing you need to know, and I'm sure you already know this, is that his value depends on Josh Jacobs being out. So here's what we know right now. Tom Pelissero, he's the NFL Network's guy. He reported that the chest injury for Josh Jacobs looks like he likely, not certainly, but likely avoided a major injury in Week 7 versus the Eagles. Now, he did not play this game. Here's the thing that's really interesting about it. He didn't play in this last game in Week 8, but before he got hurt the week prior, he was doing really, really well. And this just validates the fact that you can only play Drake if Josh Jacobs is out. He had 6 carries for 29 yards and a touchdown, plus 3 catches for 38 yards. Now, eventually he got hurt on, I believe, that scoring touchdown right before halftime, and he immediately went into the locker room. That's a good sign for people who are worried about the value of Drake. If you want Drake to be your guy and you own him on your team and you don't own Jacobs, you want Jacobs to be hurt, that's a very solid sign that he's going to be hurt for a while because a lot of guys don't immediately go to the locker room. When that happens, it's usually a pretty bad thing. So I would monitor it, and if Jacobs is out, Drake could be a very good pickup. Again, not talking about start-sit, but in the meantime, Drake could be a very good fill-in option for you if you're looking to replace Jacobs if he's out. Other running backs are A.J. Dillon at 37% available. He's played really well recently. In fact, he had 4.9 yards per carry. That was actually better than Aaron Jones. Now, he is not a better running back than Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is a more versatile guy who can catch out of the backfield as well as just about any other back in the league. But if you're looking for a dynasty pickup, A.J. Dillon is a definite guy to keep your eye on. In fact, he's one injury away from being a top 24 option. Alex Collins there, he is 41% available. He had an off week last week, but here's what's interesting. They absolutely torched, shredded, crushed, demolished the Jaguars. They won 31-7, and that actually kept Collins' value low because they stopped giving him the ball. They already know that their RB1 is hurt. They can't afford to hurt their running back too, so they stopped giving him the ball, and they gave the ball a lot more to Rashad Penny. So should we be concerned about Rashad Penny getting touches? No. Rashad Penny had 7 carries for 7 yards. He had 1 yards per carry. He was horrible. Alex Collins will be fine, and as long as Chris Carson is out, Collins is a good fantasy running back who had an off week. Pick up Collins if you have not already. That being said, there is a bye week next week, so he was not probably the short-term option for you. Of course, we already talked about McKissick there, but there is one more guy to take a look at, and that is Jarrett Patterson. He had 11 carries for 46 yards. They really gave him sort of a test drive in this last game to see what he can do. Ultimately, he had 4.2 yards per carry. He was fairly effective, but he is nowhere near the pass-catching back that McKissick is. That is going to keep him off the field when they are down big, when they need a quick score, a 2-minute warning drive, when it's 3rd and long. Situations like that is going to keep him off the field. I think that he is worth keeping an eye on, but I wouldn't pick him up. But yeah, he did run. In fact, he was better and more effective on the ground than McKissick, but I just don't think he offers enough versatility for a team that's struggling with its defense and needs pass-catching weapons because they really only have him and McLaurin. Yeah, McKissick will be the guy there. course, while Barkley remains out, Devontae Booker is a good option. And he's not the most effective, and he's not as good as Barkley, but he's got 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and he is a safe bet to get you 15-plus touches. So you got to consider picking up Barkley if you haven't at this point, though I would assume any Barkley owners have probably already done that if you are at all smart. Of course, we look at the Eagles running back situation. Miles Sanders is now on the IR, so here's a confusing thing. Jordan Howard is there, Boston Scott is there, and Gainwell is there. But here's what really happened. Kenneth Gainwell had 13 carries for just 2.1 yards per carry. He was so bad, they just stopped giving him the ball. They gave the ball to Boston Scott, who had ran for 5 yards per carry off 12 carries, and he scored 2 touchdowns. So then your first thought's maybe he's the guy. But you know who else played well? Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard played well. He had 12 carries for 4.7 yards per carry and 2 touchdowns as well. Both of those guys are extremely productive last game. I think long-term, the option there is going to be much more Boston Scott, but I also think Kenneth Gainwell is going to have a role. Seems like a mess of a running back by committee system. Keep your eye on it, but I probably wouldn't waste a roster spot on it unless I'm completely desperate for running backs and I'm looking to replace Miles Sanders. Of course, James Robinson, he came into this week questionable to return, ended up playing versus the Seahawks, and then was playing great before getting hurt again and was out the rest of the game. So while he was out and will likely be out next week, and if he is, Carlos Hyde is a guy to look at. He had 9 carries for 32 yards. That's not great, but that's 3.6 yards per carry. Here's where he shined. He caught 6 of 8 targets for 40 yards. That being said, he does play the Bills next week. That is an incredibly tough matchup. So keep an eye on Hyde. Maybe he's not a guy to play next week, but at least pick him up. And maybe 2 weeks from now, if Robinson is still out, Hyde will have some value. That being said, I just traded for James Robinson, so I'm a little nervous about his injury. But I traded away Calvin Ridley and got James Robinson, as well as I got a first-round pick. So, I'm going to be honest with you right now, I'm pretty happy with that. All right, getting into the wide receivers, the trend continues. There's some value here. Nothing great, nothing super exciting that's going to save your season. But sometimes it's one move at a time, and especially for you dynasty people out there, continue to stack your roster no matter what. Here's some options for you. Now, with the news of Calvin Ridley said he is stepping away from football to focus on his mental health. Well, here's what's interesting about that. Russell Gage looked like he'd be the next guy up in that receiving core. He got 0 targets. And then the Olamide Zaccheaus wide receiver there, he had just 1 catch for 12 yards. So who's the guy? Well, it turns out the receiver's Tajay Sharp. He's actually a former pretty early draft pick who showed a lot of potential and was a sleeper for many years. Never really got it done playing there in Tennessee, but, well, that's Tennessee. Now he comes here in this situation. He's finally got a role, and he made the most of it. 6 targets, 5 catches, and 58 yards. He is a guy to consider picking up. He could have value for the rest of the season. Certainly, it's going to be Kyle Pitts. It's going to be Cordero Patterson. There's some other guys there, but he has got a role. There's no reason he can't expand that to even more targets. I don't trust him. I wouldn't be surprised if next game he only sees a catch or 2, but who knows? The chance of him being, a guy who can get 8 catches for 100 yards in a game and just be this volume stud, they're there, and they're worth it. Some other guys to consider. Nico Collins is 99% available. He's a dynasty target to keep your eye on. He caught all 4 of his targets last week for 55 yards. He doesn't offer short-term value because there's too many weapons there. There's just too many weapons there. I'll say that again, and the quarterback situation isn't great. But in dynasty leagues, he offers a lot of value. If you're like 0-8 or like 1-7 or 2-6, he's a guy to just stash and see how it goes. Jarvis Landry, he might be the best receiver pickup of all these guys that we're going to talk about, right up there with Parker. He got 10 targets, 5 catches, I believe 50-something yards versus the Steelers last week. Of course, that offense and that team is struggling. They're going to be okay. They've had some injury concerns. Ultimately, a wide receiver who gets 10 targets in a game has some value. He is not going to go out there and be this 1,500-yard receiver who's going to get you 12-plus touchdowns. But for the remainder of the season, he is a volume guy in PPR leagues who offers you quite a bit of value, and he is the clear number 1 wideout in that team. So I actually like Jarvis Landry quite a bit. I also like Cole Beasley. The last 2 games have been great for Cole Beasley, who is 40% available. Now, 2 games ago, he had 7 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown. Last game, he got 13 targets, 10 catches, and 110 yards. And for many people, maybe asking themselves, okay, where did this production come from? Last 2 games, probably a fluke. Maybe not, however. The last 2 games, Dawson Knox has been out with that hand injury. I believe he had surgery on his hand. That's probably the reason that Cole Beasley's had this production, is because Josh Allen needs this safety blanket, his check down guy, his safe option. Cole Beasley is that, especially when the tight ends are out. So he is a very safe PPR pickup. At 43%, Kadarius Toney, must-consider guy. His last game healthy had 10 catches for 189 yards. He is a first-round pick wide receiver who very well we could be looking back a few years from now and realizing that he's just as good as Jamar Chase or Jalen Waddle or any of the other guys from that draft class. Sterling Shepard's also 46% available. His last fully healthy game, he caught 10 of 14 for 79 yards. He's another PPR stud there. You'd also look at Brandon Ayuk. Again, starting to get some names that we're not huge on, but there's some value there. Brandon Ayuk is 49% available. Last game, he had 7 targets, 4 catches, and 45 yards, as well as pulling in a 2-point conversion. Not your best option there. Deebo Samuel is the clear wide receiver 1, but it was a really good year last year for Brandon Ayuk. So kind of wondering, is he going to bounce back to that? Who knows? We'll see. Keep monitoring him. Probably wouldn't pick him up, but he's a guy to keep your eye on. 52% Hunter Renfrow. He is a consistent, safe PPR stud. He's going to get you 6 to 7 catches for 60-plus yards. The touchdowns haven't really been there, but he's safe in PPR, and it's hard to predict touchdowns anyway, so it's nice to avoid players who you are depending on the score for that to happen. Darnell Mooney is a dynasty guy at 58% available. He caught 6 of 9 for 64 yards last game. Hopefully that quarterback situation gets better, and if it does, he could have huge upside in the future. It is just a question of the quarterback that he is stuck dealing with. Rashad Bateman, 70% available. In his second NFL game, he had 80 receiving yards. He's got a bye week this week. I'm excited to see how he comes back from that bye in week 3. That's going to be a real teller for us. Finally, Jamison Crowder, 81% available. He caught 8 of 9 targets for 84 yards and a 2-point conversion. Mike White has turned that offense around at least the last couple of games and offered a lot more fantasy value to those receivers. If White is the real deal, then so is Jamison Crowder's fantasy value. Again, ultimately, those are some names for you to consider. Nobody I absolutely love, but there's tons of options there. Check your scoring and what you're looking for, and hopefully we can help you find somebody. Of course, use the comment section down below. We'll try to kind of help you talk through those options a little bit more. All right, so getting into the tight ends, there's just not a lot of options there at this point. So I'll just bring up 2 guys. One is Pat Freiermuth, the tight end for the Steelers at 90% available. He's had back-to-back solid games. 2 games ago, he went 7 targets, 7 catches, and 58 yards. And last game, he had 7 targets, 4 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown. Now, here's what's interesting to me. 1, that volume increase is clearly a sign that they're trusting him more and they're working him in more into that offense. And 2, it's clearly an impact of the Juju Smith-Schuster being out on the IR. Ultimately, the Steelers won both of those games, and their offense was a bit more productive than they have been in some of their matchups. So I think they're going to continue to lean on him. I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to see 7 or 8 targets a game for the foreseeable future. Now, we've only seen 2 games of sample size, so that is not a guarantee. That means he is a pickup and not a start, depending on what tight ends you have. Now, tight end position's shallow. If you're picking him up to start him, he is not a bad option. He's still probably the best you have, but you're not going to start him over a Darren Waller or a Travis Kelce or a Dalton Schultz. You're going to pick him up, however, at the least, stash him on your bench. The other guy to consider is Dawson Knox. Like I said, he is currently out right now. He had that broken hand that he had surgery on, but there's actually a fair chance he plays next week. And whenever he comes back, he has value. He was a key part of that offense and had 5 touchdowns in 6 games. So keep your eye on him. But those are really the only tight ends to talk about at this point. Even guys like Zach Ertz have been snatched up off the waiver wire so quickly. There's just not a lot out there at this point. We really, really hope that in the first couple weeks of the season, you listen to us when we say to pick up Schultz and some of these other options. Getting into the tight ends, there are so many available kickers. I cannot even handle it. I'm going to go through this really fast, and I'm not going to go in depth on any of these guys because it's take your pick. Nick Folk is 39% available, second in kicker scoring. Crosby is 45% available, fifth in kicker scoring. Graham Gano is 74% available, sixth in scoring. Daniel Carlson is 74% available and eighth in scoring. Greg Joseph is 69% available and 9th in scoring. Randy Bullock is 82% available and 10th in scoring. Evan McPherson is 50% available and 12th in scoring. And Chase McLaughlin is 77% available and 13th in kicker scoring. You got options, just take your pick. It's really that simple. There's no point in getting into it. There's no point about talking about it. Even if you're like, well, I want to go week to week on a kicker. There's so many guys available this week that I guarantee you there will be guys available next week. Same thing with the defenses. This is blowing my mind. The Cardinals defense is 23% available. They are number one in defensive scoring. The Cowboys are 43% available and fourth in defensive scoring. And the list continues on. The Colts are 37% available. The Saints are 55% available. The Packers are 68%. The Bears are 72%. The Panthers are 57%. The Vikings are 85%. And the Titans are 90% available. And all of those options are within the top 14 in fantasy defensive scoring. You have got options, and you've even got good options. Long-term value, it's hard not to be excited about the Titans, or the Vikings have really been turning some things around. Or at 43% available, what about the Cowboys, who are a top 4 fantasy defense? I cannot understand it. I'm not going to drag this on. There are options. Now, if you want to know which of those options you should choose, I will gladly discuss it with you in the comments. Just leave a comment, ask a question, we'll talk about it. But oh my goodness, why are people not making moves for these positions? They count, they score points. I don't get it. So that's the video, guys. Nice and short and simple. None of the options are fantastic. None of the options are great, but there's value to be had out there. And you know what? As little options as there are for you, there is for your opponents. So pick these guys up, keep them off the opponent's bench, keep them off the opponent's roster, and hey, bolster your lineup for another week. Let's keep charging on through and get some championships this year, guys.